It happened on a Wednesday. Funny how destruction never waits for a Friday. I arrived at the office early as usual. That was me. Always early, always prepared. For 27 years, I had been Veronica Hale, CFO, the steady hand that guided Titan Retail Group through every storm. I survived mergers, recessions, CEO scandals, and market crashes. I thought I had earned security. I thought wrong. That morning felt off. People avoided eye contact. My assistant, Megan, barely mumbled hello. The executive floor, normally, buzzing with morning meetings and quiet urgency, felt like a graveyard. At 10:03 a.m., I was summoned. Not to the boardroom, to conference room D small, anonymous. The kind of room you use to fire people quietly. I walked in, my heels clicking sharply on the polished floor. Waiting inside were 6 people I knew too well. Thomas Brigg, CEO, Lila Myers, General Counsel, 3 board members whose names I barely respected, and David, my so-called friend, the COO. The room reeked of discomfort. Thomas didn't waste time. Veronica, thank you for joining us. His tone was flat, rehearsed. We're here regarding the recent investment loss tied to the CoreWave acquisition. I stiffened. That deal had been Jason Morris's, the head of M&A, not mine. I had flagged issues, emailed concerns, been ignored. I opened my mouth to remind them, but Thomas raised a hand. The board has reviewed the situation. In the interest of protecting shareholder value and public trust, someone must be held accountable. My stomach twisted. You're not serious. David wouldn't meet my eyes. Coward. Lila slid a manila envelope across the table. Severance package, NDA, everything neat, pre-planned. This wasn't about failure. This was about optics. They needed a scapegoat, and I was the perfect candidate. Older. Seen as inflexible by the younger execs. Too by the book in a world. Obsessed with risk and disruption. A dinosaur they could sacrifice. I fought. I pushed back. I laid out my defense with clinical precision. Every flagged email, every risk report, every ignored warning. Lila's lips curled. Veronica, let's not make this harder than it needs to be. Thomas nodded, almost pitying. You've had a wonderful run here, but leadership is about moving forward. Sometimes difficult decisions must be made. They spoke like executioners offering last rites. It wasn't personal. It was just business. Funny how betrayal always wears a polite smile. In the end, I signed. I didn't cry, I didn't beg. I signed because I knew the machine. Fighting now wouldn't save me. Not yet. HR escorted me out the back entrance like a criminal. No goodbye party, no speeches, just a silent elevator ride and a cardboard box filled with years of loyalty, reduced to framed certificates and half-used pens. News broke within the hour. Titan CFO steps down amidst financial scandal. No mention of Jason. No mention of the ignored warnings. Just my name, splashed across headlines as the fall girl. I watched from my living room as analysts speculated. Pundits tore apart my reputation in 30-second soundbites. Friends from the industry? Silent. Emails and texts went unanswered. My phone stopped ringing. In 24 hours, I became untouchable, exiled, forgotten. They didn't just fire me. They erased me. For weeks, I barely left the house. Humiliation clung to me like a second skin. Rage boiled quietly, but grief smothered it. Until one night, while sorting through old files, I found something. An old drive. Backups of internal audits, flagged compliance issues, hidden expense reports, all ignored by the board over the years. Proof. Proof they didn't just scapegoat me. Proof they buried worse sins. And in that moment, grief melted away. Rage sharpened. I realized something they didn't. They pushed me out thinking I was weak. They made me disappear thinking I'd fade quietly. They thought they could control the narrative forever. They forgot who I am. Veronica Hale. The woman who kept this company alive when they were still learning how to hold a conference call. They wanted me erased. Instead, they created something much worse. They created patience, precision, A reckoning. That night, I poured a glass of wine, stared out over the city skyline, and whispered to the empty room. "You think it's over?" I smiled. "I'm just getting started." The headlines faded faster than I expected. One week I was the scandal. The next I was old news. That's how this world works. The machine moves on. The problem wasn't the public. It was the silence after. No calls, no emails, no offers. People who once begged for a lunch meeting vanished. Former protégés, the same ones who used to hang on to my every word, ghosted me like I was contagious. The industry turned cold. I was branded as toxic, a dinosaur blamed for failure. The narrative, crafted so carefully by Thomas and Lila, stuck like tar. I spent months suffocating in that silence, waking up to emptiness, checking my inbox like a ritual, knowing there was nothing waiting. Days blurred into nights. I stopped wearing makeup, stopped cooking, stopped believing this was temporary. Every time I scrolled LinkedIn and saw Jason or David posting about innovative new strategies, bile rose in my throat. They were thriving. I was forgotten. It was humiliating. But something about humiliation, it either breaks you or it burns you alive. In my case, it did both. And from the ashes, something colder emerged. I stopped hoping they'd fix my reputation. I stopped wishing for validation. Instead, I started remembering. Remembering every late night I cleaned up their mistakes. Every closed-door meeting where I saved the company from disaster. Every slight. Every betrayal. And as I remembered, I started collecting. Not physically. The files from my career had been boxed and shoved into storage. No, I collected in my mind. Names, incidents, weaknesses. I knew everything about them. Thomas's vanity and fear of risk. Lila's questionable ethics masked as creative lawyering. David's addiction to approval. They used me as a shield, and when the arrows stopped, they discarded me. But shields remember the hands that held them. Slowly, I began pulling my life together. I hired a discreet assistant, someone young, hungry, and with no ties to the Urijar old world. I started attending quiet industry events, not the flashy ones, backdoor networking, private dinners, off-the-record conversations. I wasn't looking for sympathy. I was looking for cracks. And cracks there were. Titan Retail Group was struggling without me. Product delays, shrinking margins, poor supplier relations. I read every quarterly report. With a predator's patience. They were bleeding slowly. Too slowly for anyone outside to notice yet. Perfect. Meanwhile, I rebuilt my own capital. I sold off properties, liquidated dormant investments, and quietly aligned with smaller private equity groups who owed me favors. Veronica Hale? Disgraced CFO? No. Veronica Hale, quiet investor and industry ghost. I had no social media, no press, appearances. I became invisible, and in invisibility, I thrived. They couldn't attack what they couldn't see. What they didn't know was that I was aligning allies. Old colleagues who left on good terms. Vendors Titan had burned. Even board members disgruntled with Thomas's arrogance. It wasn't revenge. Yet, not exactly. It was preparation. I watched them party on rooftops while earnings fell. I watched them post about next-gen leadership while internal reviews tanked. They thought I was done. They thought I was irrelevant. No one knew that beneath their crumbling empire, I was quietly laying dynamite. I didn't need the spotlight anymore. I needed patience. Patience until the right moment. When Titan Retail Group was weak enough. When public trust was low enough. When even their loyal investors started asking hard questions. Then, and only then, would I strike. Not to return. Not to reclaim. To take everything. I wasn't coming back to be part of the story. I was coming. Back to end theirs. For now, I stayed silent. But every second, every quiet breath in my empty apartment was a countdown. And when it hit 0, they wouldn't even hear the blast. Only the silence after. Silence is only power if you know when to break it. For 2 years, I stayed quiet. I let the world forget my name. Let Titan drift comfortably into mediocrity under Thomas and his army of frauds. I watched as they posted photos from retreats and award ceremonies, desperate to prove the ship was steady. It wasn't. Not even close. I knew the cracks better than anyone. The numbers didn't lie. Margins were shrinking, inventory issues mounted, and supplier trust eroded month after month. But cracks aren't enough. Cracks just make things ugly. I needed collapse. For that, I needed leverage. Not whispers. Not rumors. Hard evidence. That's where the hidden ledgers came in. You see, when you spend nearly 3 decades as CFO, you learn things. Where the skeletons are. Where the paper trail stops publicly, but continues quietly. Before they forced me out, I backed up everything. Not maliciously, back then it was habit. But when betrayal came, that habit became my sword. Expense fraud buried under innocuous vendor payments. Off-book bonuses to executives disguised as consulting fees. Risk reports that were altered before hitting the board's eyes. I had it all. Neatly organized, time-stamped, and airtight. But having evidence wasn't enough. I couldn't just dump it publicly. That would spark investigations, sure, but it wouldn't give me control. Chaos benefits no one, especially not the one pulling the strings. Control was the goal, so I got strategic. Step 1, allies. Real ones. I started identifying the disillusioned, not in Titan, outside it. Former executives ousted quietly over the years, vendors who lost contracts, unfairly. Even competitors burned by Thomas's arrogance. I didn't promise revenge. I promised opportunity. Together we formed what Evelyn, my most ruthless partner, called the Circle. Private investors, influential industry veterans. Quietly, through blind trusts and holding companies, we began buying Titan stock. Not in waves, that would spook them. Just slow, steady accumulation. Enough to matter, but not enough to alarm. Meanwhile, I began feeding breadcrumbs to key industry journalists. Not directly. Through controlled leaks. Subtle at first. Questions about Titan's ethics. Anonymous tips about financial irregularities. Enough to shift public perception from industry leader to possible sinking ship. Inside Titan, panic brewed. They ramped up flashy marketing campaigns, desperate to distract shareholders. They pushed risky partnerships to inflate short-term numbers. Exactly what I wanted. The more desperate they got, the more mistakes they made. Thomas, in particular, became erratic. I knew his type. Terrified of losing control, obsessed with his image. He began ignoring risk assessments, pushing aggressive acquisition attempts. I smiled watching from afar. Give a fool a stage and he'll hang himself without you ever needing to push. Step 2. Infiltration. I recruited 2 former employees, loyal, brilliant, and overlooked by Titan's current regime. Through subtle introductions, I helped them land mid-level positions back inside the company. They weren't spies. They were observers, reporting back quietly about culture decline, executive paranoia, and most importantly, board frustration. The board, once Thomas's greatest weapon, was cracking. Investors weren't blind anymore. Stock was stagnant. Growth had halted. Behind closed doors, whispers grew. Maybe Thomas isn't the right fit anymore. Exactly where I needed them to be. Step 3. Timing. I waited for the perfect storm, and it came faster than I expected. Titan missed Q4 targets. Badly, publicly. Thomas blamed market volatility. Internally, panic ensued. Stockholders called emergency meetings. Confidence plummeted. That's when Evelyn and the Circle struck. In a bold yet calculated move, we called for a special shareholder vote. The YATSI? Motion. Leadership overhaul. Remove Thomas. Restructure the board. The media went wild. Analysts speculated overnight. Could Titan face a hostile takeover? They asked. No, it wasn't hostile. It was surgical, planned years in advance. The night before the vote, I stayed up late, staring at the old company logo on my computer screen. The same logo under which they humiliated me. My phone buzzed. Evelyn. They're falling apart, she said simply. You ready? I stared at my reflection in the dark window. I didn't look like the Veronica they remembered. I was sharper now, colder. Ready. I've been ready, I replied. Tomorrow, they lose everything. And as I set my phone down, I realized something chillingly satisfying. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't broken any laws. I hadn't threatened anyone. I simply waited and let gravity do the rest. When power is built on lies, it only takes a light push for the whole tower to fall. And tomorrow, I was going to push. It was raining the morning of the vote. Fitting. Nothing cleanses like a storm. I arrived early, not to the building, but to the underground parking garage where Evelyn waited in her black sedan, calm as always. "Everything's in place," she said, flipping through documents. "We hold just under 38%. Combine that with the defectors, it's a lock." I nodded once, adjusting the cuff of my coat. No jewelry, no flair, just control. This wasn't a reunion. It was an execution. Upstairs, the annual shareholder meeting was already in motion. Thomas was at the podium, reciting inflated figures with the same polished grin he'd worn the day he fired me. He had no idea. That was the beauty of it. He still believed he was in control. But the boardroom was colder than usual. The smiles were thinner. The investors, most of whom I now owned through proxies and funds, were restless. They had seen the real numbers. They had seen the plan. The call for a leadership vote came from Evelyn's fund, but I wrote every word. Due to sustained underperformance, questionable strategic decisions, and declining investor confidence, we propose the immediate removal of CEO Thomas Brigg and a reconstitution of Titan's executive board. Simple. Ruthless. The room froze. Thomas's face twisted. Confusion, then disbelief. "This is absurd," he snapped. "We're in the middle of a turnaround. We can," Evelyn cut in. "And we are." She glanced across the table. "All shareholders holding more than 5% stake have already voted in alignment." That was the moment it hit him. He turned slowly, eyes locking on me in the back of the room. I didn't flinch. He blinked. "Veronica?" I stepped forward. Not fast, not triumphant, just deliberate. I stood behind Evelyn, folded my hands, and said nothing. My presence was enough. The room began to buzz. I watched it ripple, from the analysts to the board members to the legal counsel furiously scanning bylaws. Too late. Everything had already been done, behind the scenes, quietly, legally, impeccably. The vote began. It took 14 minutes. When the numbers flashed on the screen, 72% in favor of removal, Thomas turned pale. For a moment, he opened his mouth like he was going to fight. Then he saw my face. Not angry, not smug, just finished. His shoulders sagged. The game was over. Lila stood next. She didn't even try to resist. The general counsel who helped craft my downfall was voted out 5 minutes later. David wasn't present. He had resigned a month earlier when rumors of the coup began swirling. Coward. When the board called for nominations to fill the vacant seat, Evelyn stood. "We propose reinstating Veronica Hale as interim CEO, effective immediately." The silence was deafening. I let it hang for exactly 6 seconds before speaking. "Not interim," I said. "Calm, crisp, permanent." No one objected. They wouldn't dare. The motion passed without debate. Just like that, I was back. No parade, no applause, just power. And I didn't smile, because this wasn't victory. This was balance restored. That afternoon, I walked the halls of Titan for the first time in years. The faces were different. Younger, nervous, respectful. No one spoke unless I addressed them first. Good. Let them remember what leadership looks like. In my new office, not the one I was once escorted out of, but a larger, higher one, I sat down at the polished desk and looked out at the skyline. The storm had passed. The throne was reclaimed. But this wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Because now came the purge. And those who thought I would forget what they did were about to learn exactly how permanent my memory really was. Taking the throne was easy. Keeping it, that required cleansing. They didn't realize it yet, but the meeting that crowned me CEO wasn't the victory. It was the beginning of their reckoning. I spent my first 2 weeks observing, watching who still whispered when I entered the room, who hesitated to follow new directives, who still clung to Thomas's broken promises. Loyalty wasn't automatic. Loyalty had to be earned or enforced. My first order was subtle: department reviews. On the surface, routine. In reality, it was a purge in progress. Every senior leader tied to the old regime faced scrutiny: metrics, performance, team morale. Everything they once used to measure me, now weaponized against them. One by one, I summoned them. Jason West, former head of sales, was first. He swaggered in, confident. "I know things got rough, Veronica, but I've always been on your side." I let him talk. Let him dig his own grave with fake smiles and hollow reassurances. Then I slid the report across the table. Missed targets, client losses, toxic leadership complaints. "Jason," I said coldly, "you didn't just fail. You infected this company," he stammered, offered to work harder. I didn't flinch. "No, you're done." Security escorted him out within the hour. No farewell party, no golden parachute. Just gone. Word spread fast. Fear rippled through the ranks. That was the point. Next was Marissa, once Thomas's loudest supporter. She tried a different tactic. Tears, pleas, playing the female solidarity card. Pathetic. "You laughed when they humiliated me," I reminded her. "You called me deadwood in front of interns. Tell me, Marissa, how much of that solidarity did you show me then?" She had no answer. She didn't get a second chance. By the end of the month, I cleaned house. 15 senior executives, gone. Dozens of middle managers quietly pushed out or offered deals too humiliating to accept. Those who tried to resist, public firings. Quiet rumors spread after every one. Don't cross Veronica. Good. Let fear do what loyalty couldn't. But removal wasn't enough. I wanted permanence. So I made calls. Private, discreet ones. Industry friends. Board members at competing firms. Headhunters. The message was simple: hire any of them, lose access to my network. Blacklisted. Forever. Within weeks, those who once mocked me found their phones silent. No job offers, no interviews, no invitations. To conferences. One by one, they vanished from LinkedIn, scrubbing profiles, quietly bowing out of relevance. I didn't gloat. Gloating is for amateurs. I simply moved forward as if they never existed. Because as far as Titan and the industry was concerned, they didn't. At the next quarterly board meeting, Evelyn raised a glass to me privately. "Efficient work," she said. "No loose ends." I smiled faintly. "Loose ends become knives when you turn your back," I replied. The board respected me now. Investors trusted me again. Employees, while cautious, knew where power truly resided. Titan was mine. Entirely. And those who thought they could write me out of history were now reduced to whispered warnings. The blood vote was over. But history would remember only one thing. Not how they forced me out. Not how they laughed. But how in the end I erased every one of them and built my empire on the ashes of their arrogance. They thought being fired was the end. They thought disappearing quietly was their salvation. They thought I'd be satisfied watching them fade into silence. They were wrong. I didn't come this far to let them walk away clean. I came to make sure they never stood again. That's where the files came in, the ones I backed up long before they showed me the door. I had everything: fake consulting contracts, hidden bonus payouts, tampered reports. They used me as their shield while they siphoned value behind the board's back. And when it all went south, they threw me to the fire. But I survived. They didn't. After the purge, I reopened the files. Quietly, thoroughly. Evelyn's legal team helped me comb through them, validate every timestamp, cross-reference every dirty detail. The plan wasn't to expose them all at once. That's not how you end legacies, you dismantle them. Brick by brick. I started with Thomas, the golden CEO, the man who built a reputation on vision and bold leadership. Except, he also built a secret slush fund out of unreported vendor kickbacks. We packaged the evidence and sent it, anonymously, to the regulatory board. And to his new employer. The fallout was delicious. investigation, suspension, resignation, and not a whisper of my name anywhere in it. Next was Lila, general counsel, the lawyer who buried every questionable deal under legal jargon. I found emails, old, time-stamped, encrypted, where she coached executives on how to adjust the language to avoid liability. The moment I dropped them to a former compliance officer she once betrayed, it went straight to the press. Overnight, Lila's career died. Conference panels pulled her. Law firms withdrew contracts. Her online profiles vanished. Jason, Marissa, the rest of the so-called leadership team? I didn't need to expose them. I simply let their old failures surface at the right moment. One received an audit. Another faced a lawsuit from a former employee I discreetly supported. Each one fell. Not loudly, but permanently. They tried to frame me as the incompetent one, the scapegoat, the one who didn't understand modern leadership. Now they were defending themselves in legal documents, and I was giving interviews about Titan's recovery. Poetic, really. The industry started whispering, not about scandal, but about efficiency. About how Titan had cut out dead weight. About how the new CEO was rebuilding trust. They didn't know the full story. They didn't need to. All they needed to know was that I was untouchable now, and that anyone who ever stood with the old regime was gone. One morning, I received a letter, handwritten, from Thomas. It was short, regretful, pitiful. He didn't apologize, not really. Men like him never do. He simply said, "You were right. We were wrong. You won." I burned. The letter. This wasn't about winning anymore. It was about making history right. About showing every person who ever watched me fall that I didn't just rise. I rewrote the script. The reckoning files weren't just revenge. They were truth. And truth, when released at the perfect time, is more destructive than any lie they ever used against me. History doesn't remember losers. It forgets them. That's why I knew my mission wasn't finished after the reckoning files buried them. Sure, they were gone, jobless, disgraced, whispered about in private circles they no longer belonged to. But whispers fade. Stories get rewritten. And with time, they might have become martyrs in someone else's version of events. I couldn't allow that. This had to be absolute. 6 months after the purge, Titan was reborn. Quarterly profits. Shattered projections. The media dubbed us the comeback kings, though they should have said queen. Investors adored me now. Employees respected me. Fear had shifted to loyalty. But the company still bore the scars of the old regime. Their fingerprints on legacy systems, department names, branded programs, small reminders that they were ever here. I hated it. It felt like ghosts clinging to the walls of my empire. So I decided to exorcise them. The announcement came at our annual summit, broadcasted live to every office worldwide. I stood alone on stage, dressed in black, not mourning, claiming. Behind me, the old Titan logo slowly faded from the massive screen until nothing remained but clean, white space. "We have come far," I began. "But we cannot continue dragging the past behind us like rusted chains. The old Titan, the one built on arrogance, deceit, and betrayal, no longer exists." I paused. The room was silent, hanging on every word. Effective immediately, this company will operate under a new name, Hale & Co. No cheers, no applause, just stunned faces. I smiled thinly. They'd understand soon enough. Hale & Co. isn't just a name, it's a promise. This company will reflect integrity, competence, strength. It will reflect me. The message couldn't have been clearer. Their names, Thomas, Lila, Jason, Marissa, erased from the building, from the website, from corporate memory. All internal documents scrubbed, all plaques removed, all awards discarded. By the following month, even industry databases and trade publications had shifted. Old headlines were quietly edited, bios deleted. It was as if they never existed. Only I remained, not as the survivor, not as the comeback story. As the origin weeks later, a junior manager who didn't know the full story asked about a dusty board photo that had accidentally survived the purge. Who were those people? She asked innocently. I stared at the faded, smiling faces. Ghosts. Nobody important, I said quietly, and I ordered the photo burned. In the end, they didn't become legends. They became shadows no one remembered. But me? I became the story. Forever.